Hello and welcome back to Chapter 3, Interpersonal Communication and the Self. Previously, we've discussed how we see ourselves and how we feel about ourselves. Now we're going to be tying it to communication, and this is going to be presenting the self. This involves impression management, which is the communication strategies people use to influence how others view them. And this is going to be the majority of what we're going to be talking about for the rest of this chapter. So, how do we engage in impression management? There are three things to keep in mind when we focus on the public and private selves. We have our perceived self, the person you believe yourself to be in moments of honest self-reflection. This is self-concept, this is self-esteem. The presented self is the way we want to appear to others. I want to appear intelligent. I want to appear funny. I want to appear confident. I want to appear whatever. Beautiful. Then the face work, that is how we get from the perceived self to the presented self. Face work is the verbal and nonverbal ways we act in order to maintain our presenting image and the image to others. So, we engage in face work to have this impression management. So, to get from our perceived self, maybe I don't see myself as super confident, to my presented self, where I am incredibly confident. Some characteristics of impression management are that we strive to construct multiple identities. We may want to be perceived in one way with a certain group and another way with a different group. How do you want to be perceived by your parents, by your boyfriend or girlfriend's parents? Or how is that different from how you want to be perceived by your friends? These are constant or multiple identities which are reflections of how we want to be perceived. And how do we get there? Again, through face work. What are some of the ways that we show confidence or show spontaneity? Does this mean that we are being fake? No, it simply means that we are engaging in impression management, which is a social, it's social, it's communication. Impression management is also collaborative, meaning communication being co-created. Impression management involves both sides. So the other people also have to be able to agree to your impression management. I love when friends try to create their own nicknames. Obviously, this reflects impression management being collaborative because the other friends can just disagree with it. For example, one of my friends wanted to be called Danny the Lion. And we did it for a little while, but what we then transitioned that to was Dan DeLion, as in dandelion. So it was a funny way for us to change the impression management to be more aligned with how we saw him instead of maybe how he wanted to be, what his presented self he wanted to be seen as. Impression management can be deliberate or unconscious. This is also reflected because there are some ways that we want to be perceived, but we don't really do it in deliberate ways. Instead, we just act how we would normally, and then that reflects an impression management. Um, so this speaks to authenticity of it, but also, um, but just because impression management is deliberate doesn't mean that it is necessarily inauthentic. Face-to-face management involves the manner, the appearance, and setting. So, those are the general ways how we engage in impression management through face work. We do it in multiple ways. Through manner. communicators' words and actions. What words or actions do we use to communicate confidence or intelligence? We may use bigger words. Maybe we want to be seen as go-getter, ambitious. Then we may engage in certain actions to show that for our boss. Appearance. Personal items that shape our image are also means of impression management. What do you dress like? How do you take care of yourself? Do you go to the gym? Do you try to lose weight? Do you try to gain weight? All of these things are appearance that shape impression management in others. And we also have the setting, the physical items we use to influence how others view us as well. This can be, what car do we drive? What house do we live in? When we are in an office, how do we structure the office to create a positive impression in others? All of which are ways in which we engage in impression management, because we want to be perceived in a certain way, and we do that through this sort of face work. There's also ways that we do this through social media. The internet offers an opportunity for people to present themselves in a variety of ways. And in impression and mediated identity management, how do the factors of manner, the way we talk, appearance, the way we are seen, and our setting, maybe the website, how do those change? It is a lot easier. It is a lot easier to be able to change the way we talk, our manner, because we can just delete and then type something else. Our appearance could change. We could use old photos. We can use doctored photos to be perceived in a certain way. Setting is the setting. Doesn't really apply as much to social media, but there are certain ways that it can affect, but more smaller. So impression management, it has to be balanced with honesty, because with impression management, a lot of it seems rather deceitful. That I want to be perceived in a certain way, so I'm going to engage in behaviors that will make me seem that way. But that being said, impression management isn't necessarily dishonesty. Impression management involves deciding which part of yourself to reveal. So people sometimes misrepresent themselves to gain the trust of others and just deceive them. But there's obviously ways and times when it's appropriate or inappropriate, effective, ineffective. So we have to be able to create this balance. Things like job interviews, it's pretty expected that we put our best foot forward, that we engage in impression management. So while dressing up nicely, even though that's not how you would normally dress, speaking very formally, even though we don't usually speak formally, that is impression management. That's expected. Maybe even having a briefcase or something else that you bring with you, talking about setting, to further illustrate a certain impression, a certain presented self. All of those are not really deceitful, but they're putting your best foot forward. Lying, saying, you know what, I've had 5 years of experience, even though I've only had one. I went to Yale instead of Cal State Fullerton, etc., etc. All of that would be seen as deceitful. So it's about balancing these two. So We also create a presented self through how we disclose ourself. Self-disclosure is the personal information about the self that is purposefully and verbally communicated to another person. What are some of the things that we share about ourselves? My favorite color, my name, what I go to school for, what do I do outside of school, what is my favorite TV show? All of those are self-disclosures that eventually will create connection. But that's a way that we engage in impression management. I may say to others that my favorite TV show is Breaking Bad to create a positive impression. Instead, when what my actual favorite TV show is um, Keeping Up with the Kardashians. It's not, but if that was, then I would definitely keep that private. I don't know why. Because I don't want to be perceived that way. Self-disclosure factors include honesty. Are you being honest or dishonest with your self-disclosure? In that TV example, the honest answer would be Keeping Up with the Kardashians, but it may not be how I want to be perceived. Another example of this could be um, what if someone is not really looking, not really interested or expecting themselves to be at Taco Bell for the next 5 years, but they want to be hired at Taco Bell, they may emphasize their investment in the company, even though that may not necessarily be totally honest. Next, we have the depth of self-disclosure. The depth of self-disclosure involves how private the information is. Because there's breadth of self-disclosure, the amount of the surface level stuff of self-disclosure that we share about multiple topics, but then there's also depth of self-disclosure. So while I may say my favorite TV show is Breaking Bad, depth disclosures would have to go through multiple levels of um, privacy management. We also have availability of information. If the information is readily available, then that may not be an incredibly effective self-disclosure. Something like, I am 6'3". That would not be that would be easily available information because you could see me in a face-to-face setting. Versus context, the context of sharing in these situations also plays into it. Because are there certain contexts, be them relationship contexts or situational contexts, where self-disclosure may not be appropriate or effective. At the very first date, sharing in-depth disclosure would not be effective or appropriate. Whereas years down the line, when you're being committed to each other, then maybe that context is appropriate, not to mention maybe it would be inappropriate to not share or not self-disclose more. So self-disclosure defined as the self is the subject. The self is the subject of this conversation. It has to be intentional. It has to be directed at another person. It also has to be honest. Of course, there are varying levels of honesty, but it does have to hold some grain of truth, otherwise it is not truly self-disclosure. It is also revealing of some aspect of myself, contains information generally unavailable from other sources. Again, self-disclosure of me being 6'3" would not be super impactful simply because that information is readily available, and also gains much of its intimate nature from the context that if I disclose very personal information to a person randomly on the street, it may not be super intimate. Versus if I tell someone that deep information, a personal relationship, a really solid friendship, then it might gain more intimate nature there. There are two big models of self-disclosure. There's social penetration model as well as the Johari window model. First, we have the social penetration theory. Social penetration theory speaks of different types of information being disclosed. First, breadth. The breadth of information is the amount of things on a surface level. My career ambitions, my feelings about our relationship, my relationships with members of so on and so forth. All of those are just random, could be like surface level breadth of information that I'm presenting to you, that I'm disclosing. The depth is like peeling the onions back of the person. So where my feelings about our relationship, I like our relationship. It's a very nice relationship. That may be not as maybe the breadth level, the surface level, whereas how I actually feel about the relationship, I may feel a bit conflicted. That there are certain things I like, there are certain things that I dislike, but what I share may be different than how I actually feel. And I would have to get to know the relationship more. I'd have to learn more about the other person to be able to engage in that sort of depth of disclosure. The types of information, there's many different types of information. There's initial ritualized stock responses. This tends to be very surface level. Next are facts that we believe. This is where we get further into depth. Think about how you would disclose certain facts about how you see the world. Opinions are where we get further into depth. What are your opinions about politics or how we should act in certain situations? That is further in depth, and then even further in depth still would be our feelings about certain things. This reflects how it can sometimes be very challenging for people to share their feelings because that is, in essence, disclosing a great deal of themselves. The Johari window model is slightly different. Self-disclosure expands the open area into the hidden area. So we have the open spot. This is the known by ourselves, the things we know about ourselves, as well as the things that we know that are known by others of us. These things may be 6'3", brown hair, um, wears dress clothes, things like that. Those are the things that they know about us. And the more we engage in our relationships, then the more we will get to know about me, and that will happen through self-disclosure. Self-disclosure, other people then know more about me, that I went to Cal State Fullerton, that I enjoy running, that I like Breaking Bad. That hidden spot diminishes, that open spot increases. Then, for me to gain a better perspective of myself, I then receive feedback from that. And that removes the unknown to myself parts. Maybe I think of myself as maybe rather stupid. But when I get feedback from others, oh no, James, you're really, really smart. I don't know why they would say that, but that's fine. Then that would reduce that blind spot section and increase that open spot section. There are a few benefits to this because when both of these increase, it removes an unknown spot where the things that are unknown to others and unknown to ourselves, that unknown spot gets diminished. And we engage and we start getting some self-discovery as well as others' observations get better as well. So that reflects this Johari window model. There are many benefits and detriments to self-disclosure. Self-disclosure is not always effective, not always appropriate, and it has certain risks to it. But it also has a great deal of benefits. We'll start with the risks. The risk could potentially be that I would feel rejected. Maybe I share that, I love Keeping Up with the Kardashians. Then someone rejects me. Oh, they're awful. That's an awful TV show. Then I feel bad about that. Also, negative impressions. That could then create negative impressions of me. Decrease in relational satisfaction. Maybe in a romantic relationship, the other person thinks that we are very committed, and I think that I'm not exactly ready for that step of strong commitment. If I disclose that, that can, in essence, diminish relational satisfaction. That disclosure. Also, we have loss of influence. Loss of influence over others. If I disclose what I want, my feelings, then that may reduce my influence over others because, as well as my influence over my perceived self, or my presented self, I should say. Also, loss of control of that, as well as hurting other people. Again, going back to that hypothetical romantic relationship, if I disclose that maybe I'm not ready for that commitment, then that would could potentially diminish relational satisfaction, but it could also hurt the other person. That being said, there are certain risks, and that's understandable. But there are massive benefits associated with self-disclosure. First, catharsis. Have you ever had something rolling around in your brain, and then once you say it, you feel better? That is one of the big benefits of self-disclosure. Another big benefit is self-clarification. When you communicate your ideas, you start to understand your ideas better, as well as self-validation. When you get feedback saying that that's okay, then I feel better about it. If I share that, I like the Keeping Up with the, well, actually, real example, I used to love the Jersey Shore. And then when other people say, yeah, I loved the show too, then I feel validated in my initial perspective. Also, there's reciprocity that is allowed because as I start being able to self-disclose, the other person starts self-disclosing back. By using more self-disclosure, we also engage in more impression formation. We have more control over how other people will perceive us by what we choose to disclose. Also, relationship maintenance and enhancement, that there may be expectations of a relationship regarding self-disclosure. If you are in the first few dates, there's less of an expectation of self-disclosure. Whereas, further on in the relationship, self-disclosure is important. So self-disclosure can act as a relational maintenance and enhancement tool. Because in essence, self-disclosure is sharing information that is not readily apparent, and I am trusting you with that information. And then when you take that in, you are holding that, and that trust is being reinforced. We also have a moral obligation to self-disclose. Because, let's jump back to that hypothetical romantic relationship. If I am not entirely committed to the relationship and the other person is very committed to the relationship, then would it not be a moral obligation to let them know my honest feelings so that they can decide for themselves whether or not they want to stay in the relationship? So yes, this loss of influence and loss of control can be seen as a risk for me, but it also allows the other person to make decisions on their own as well. So there are balances. There are some guidelines because self-disclosure is not always appropriate or effective. Is the other person important to you? If the other person is not important to you, then it might not be good to disclose. Also, is the risk disclosing reasonable? If the disclosure is going to diminish the relationship, hurt the both parties for no real benefit, then then that may not be useful. I hate my boyfriend or girlfriend's family. As a result, would disclosing that be reasonable? There's really no benefit that can be gained. There's really a lot of detriment. So maybe it might not be the best thing to share. Also, is the self-disclosure appropriate? Is it too much information? I've already talked about that. Is the disclosure reciprocated? If there is reciprocal self-disclosure, that may be good. If it is not reciprocated, then maybe that is a feedback of something. Maybe they don't want to share this information. Also, will the effect be constructive? Will it help or hurt the relationship or the listener? I've talked about some of the benefits and trade-offs, and that's just something to understand for yourself. But it should strive to be constructive. There are alternatives. Alternatives to self-disclosure. When it is not appropriate or effective, there are many things that we can do. Silence. Silence is a very common one, a common way to remove the need for self-disclosure. But obviously, this can have big detriments as well. Lying is especially interesting, but benevolent lies could potentially not be malicious. For example, if your boyfriend or girlfriend tries on a shirt and it's not incredibly flattering, you may say, I like it, it looks okay. Or things like that can absolutely be to the other person's benefit. So when another good example of this is maybe you are at a party and your boyfriend or girlfriend says something that ruins the party, just something very inappropriate. You could maybe lie and say, you know what, maybe they'll get it later. So, ways to preserve the people's feelings. Also, we have equivocation, two or more plausible meanings. A good example of this could be, again, the shirt. Maybe someone's wearing a very bad shirt and says, hey, what do you think of this shirt? You can say, oh, it's very colorful. It's very lively. So, in essence, using abstract language to share, to abstract meaning, to hide the meaning of what you really mean. And then we have hinting. This is seeking to get the desired response from the other person. Disclosing something like, you know what, I hate the parents of your significant other. You may instead say, you know what, maybe I'm a bit tired right now, so I don't think I'll be able to make that situation. That could be seen as lying, but it could also potentially be that hint of maybe I don't want to be in this situation. That concludes this chapter. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you next time.